Market research helps marketers make decisions. And if you have a problem with your market research, you're probably going to have a problem with your decision. Many people believe one of the worst decisions ever was when Coca-Cola came out with New Coke. New Coke, perhaps the most failed new product in history. Well, New Coke was entirely a result of bad market research. And they messed up the market research from the get-go. They messed up the very, very first step in the process. Let's go ahead and look at the steps in the market research process. Step number one, define the problem. Step number two, plan the research design. Step three, specify how you're going to get the data, your sampling procedure. Then step four, do it, collect the data. Step five, analyze the data. Step six, prepare and present the report. And then finally, step number seven, follow up. Okay, let's start at the beginning. The first step, define the problem. And this is where Coke messed up. Pepsi had been chipping away market share from Coke for years and years and years, starting in the 1960s, all throughout the 1970s, halfway through the 1980s. And the way they'd been doing it is with a brilliant advertising campaign that they called the Pepsi Challenge. And the Pepsi Challenge was a blind taste test. There we are back to blind taste tests, where Pepsi asked admitted Coke drinkers, people that said, yes, I prefer Coke, they had them try A versus B, two cola products, but they didn't know which it was. It was blind. And it turns out that the majority of people who said that they preferred Coke actually preferred the taste of Pepsi when they didn't know what they were drinking. They preferred the taste of Pepsi. And so Coca-Cola defined the problem as people prefer the taste of Pepsi. And so they went about coming up with a formula for Coke that people would prefer to the taste of Pepsi. Well, they defined the problem incorrectly. Let me give you an analogy of defining the problem incorrectly. Kind of a silly little story, but it helps make the point. A businessman was going on a business trip. It was just a one-day trip, so only packed one shirt, but it was a fancy shirt with French cuffs. Got up in the morning, went to put his shirt on, and realized his mistake. He forgot to pack cufflinks. So in a tizzy, he ran down to a men's store, ran in, asked if they sold cufflinks. The salesperson said, no, we don't sell cufflinks. And so the man, dejected, started walking out of the store trying to figure out how he's going to fix his problem. He's got a meeting, but he doesn't have any cufflinks. And the salesperson sheepishly said, well, we sell regular shirts. See, the man's mistake was he defined his problem as I don't have cufflinks. The real problem was I don't have a shirt that's going to work for my meeting. Well, Coke defined the problem incorrectly as well. Coke defined the problem as people prefer the taste of Pepsi. The real problem was people are buying more Pepsi than Coke. What Coke did incorrectly was they focused on the taste and came out with New Coke, which was a failed product. Now take a look at the Coke can on the left, right below the Coca-Cola script. That's what the Coke can tasted like. Actually, not tasted like, that's what the Coke can looked like up until the mid-1980s. They made a slight change to the Coke can in 1985, and here's the very, very slight change, Coca-Cola Classic. Now, what's the difference there? Why did they change it from Coke to Coca-Cola Classic? Well, when they came out with New Coke was such a failure because people didn't want New Coke. They wanted their iconic Coke. They wanted the Coke that they'd known and loved for years and years and years. Well, Coke realized that there was this enormous amount of nostalgia that was tied in with Coca-Cola. So after they foolishly came out with New Coke to replace the existing Coke, and then they realized the enormity of their mistake, they brought Old Coke back. Of course, it'd be kind of crazy to call it Old Coke, and so they called it Coca-Cola Classic. It had the classic taste of Coca-Cola. And it really became an unbelievably kind of backwards success story. Here's the Advertising Age headline: Coke's switch, a classic. It expects turnaround to spark new growth. Smart or stupid, opinions mixed. They didn't do it on purpose, but they kind of backed their way into a kind of a lucky thing. Coca-Cola, erring in taking away what has been an old friend to the American consumer, may have stumbled into a stronger position to compete against its arch rival, Pepsi-Cola USA. Industry analysts and marketing consultants working with Coca-Cola believe this mistake could be one of the best things that could have happened to the company. It provides it with a sweeter line extension that competes more directly with Pepsi and gives Coke an edge in blind taste tests. Pepsi has touted its greater preference in blind taste tests for years in its Challenge TV campaign. Well, eventually the new Coke product went away in almost all of the country. You can still find it every once in a while, especially in the South. It's called Coke 2. But what happened was this enormous amount of nostalgia that people had for Coca-Cola kind of jump-started a revolution in Coke sales, and Coke market share turned around, and they started to gain market share back from Pepsi. That wasn't the way they'd planned it, but that's the way it worked out. Research can be secondary data that's been collected for some other purpose than the problem at hand, but is used for the problem at hand, or it can be primary data. Primary data is information that is collected directly from respondents to specifically address the question at hand. Now, secondary data, this is data that already exists. Where would this come from? This would come from places like, government agencies, trade and industry associations, business periodicals, and so on. This is information that has been gathered for other reasons, but you're able to use it. The U.S. federal government generates an enormous amount of data that marketers use: demographic data from the census, business commerce data from the Department of Commerce, and so on. Now, primary data, the most popular technique for gathering primary data is to take surveys, or so-called survey research. Now, surveys can take multiple forms. There are mall intercept interviews, telephone interviews, mail surveys, and focus groups. Now, focus groups are different than all of the other survey research that mentioned. And here's the number one reason: focus groups are not projectable to a population as a whole. For example, the new Coke research, they literally did hundreds of thousands of samples. So they had an enormous number of samples that they then projected to the population as a whole. When a company does a focus group, they bring 8 to 12 people into a room. They discuss the marketing situation. It typically lasts an hour to 75 minutes. They oftentimes get very, very good information, but it's not projectable to a population as a whole. That's the downside for a focus group. It's not projectable to the population as a whole. You get a lot of good information, but it's only qualitative in nature, not quantitative. Quantitative research, that's where you do mall intercept interviews, telephone interviews, mail surveys, and then from your research of a sample of the population, you then project to the population as a whole. And we'll get into the details of quantitative research design in our next module.